All right, hello friends, and in particular, the leadership team of DC Everest School District. Just want to give you a little bit of a summary of our half-day workshop from this past summer. And in order to really expedite our next conversation, rather than spending that time reviewing, I figured you can watch this in a kind of flipped classroom way at your own pace. So what we talked about in the last session is sort of a little bit about the how this program came about, sort of some of my own struggles with mental health issues that prompted me to learn a lot of these tools, and then putting these tools together to see what happens if we teach larger groups of people a large collection of tools. What happens? You saw the data. It was pretty remarkable across the board, improvements in psychological safety and every domain of mental health, which is very exciting. It just means that there are certain patterns that we understand about the brain. And so we can harness this understanding for almost everyone to shift from what most Americans are right now, lower brain dominant, through no fault of their own, to becoming more higher brain dominant pretty quickly. And so we showed you some of the data and spent some good amount of time on the motivation for learning this. Besides the data, there is also some very compelling reasons to think about this stuff and shift from lower to higher all the time. And I'll kind of summarize that. And then we will talk about the notion of embracing discomfort in brief review, and that paradoxically, to become higher brain dominant, we actually have to accept discomfort and even push for discomfort in order to really crack the code of our brain and become more and more higher brain dominant. And then we will review a four-step process for doing what we call self-regulation, which is a giant first step in being able to accept discomfort and thereby push to becoming more higher brain dominant. Okay, so in terms of the why of this, we talked about the fact that everything is a neural network basically that matters in life. Knowledge, understanding, skills, happiness, even spiritual development, these are all neural networks basically. And the great news is talent and intelligence doesn't matter, because it turns out that it's the amount of time you put in and the amount of feedback you can tolerate, whether it's from coaching or competition or counting the three C's, metrics. Are you getting feedback in terms of what's working and not working? And that is vital for becoming more and more expansive of these neural networks, whichever neural networks you want to work on. Now, the reason to do this is it's very exhilarating to be on the edge of your comfort zone. So as we expand branches of knowledge, understanding, skills, happiness, including leadership abilities, having difficult conversations, self-awareness, self-growth, learning, all these things, innovating especially, you release a series of neurotransmitters, including dopamine, which are much more exhilarating than just dopamine from passive pleasure. Retirement, vacations, eating, whatever, streaming, these are passive and they produce a little bit of dopamine, but not much else. Um, and then as you expand your neural networks more and more, even more neurotransmitters and neurochemicals and hormones of happiness get produced, and that's fulfillment. And so exhilaration and fulfillment are the reasons to really push yourself to the edge of your comfort zone, uh, because it's maximum happiness, it's maximum excellence, it's maximum success, it's maximum relationship depth of connection. Why don't we do this? Why doesn't everybody? And the payoff, by the way, just to summarize the payoff, nothing can be more important than becoming higher brain dominant because of all those payoffs that we talked about: excellence, success, happiness, depth of connections, um, great meaning internally. It's exhilarating to do this, but externally, you become more and more innovative and impactful of the people around you. That's purpose in my mind. And so what you're doing is you're expanding a part of your brain that increases your capacity to do this. And so as you do it more and more, you become more and more effective at shutting off the lower brain. You become more peaceful. Anxiety and stress go down. You become more adaptable. You're like, if something didn't work out, we'll figure out a way to innovate our way and crowdsource our way and be scientific, science our way into solving this problem or this difficult conversation or this relationship. And then you just become more and more creatively joyful. Every moment is a chance to really push the edge of our comfort zone and make new things happen internally and externally. And then the science of success, meaning the agile methodology, has been very well established. It's again, it's about iterating. It's about trying new things, measuring what works and doesn't work, getting feedback, failing fast, tossing out what's not working. That's the known formula for success, as well as for connecting with others more deeply by having more difficult emotional conversations. We create greater and greater understanding of each other, reconcile our challenges within our relationships, go to deeper levels of trust and connection. And that's another glorious aspect of a life lived very richly. Why doesn't everybody do all these things leading to this promised land of neurochemicals happiness? I would say that probably, 1 in 1,000 does this because, as you now know, it's the dopamine system that's the problem. So this capacity for, unlimited happiness, connection, excellence, success is within the grasp of everybody based on neural networks. This is now known. But why most people can't get going, especially in modern times, especially as Americans, is because when you've been very successful, you have a tendency to be prideful and contented. You've got all this pleasure, all this entertainment, all this information, and you're feeling really good about yourself. And so you're happy with getting external dopamine, right? So we have too much external dopamine, and we haven't grasped the notion of the arrival fallacy, which is the notion that getting a certain amount of money and success and relationships, that's somehow in and of itself, when you get there, that's going to produce happiness. It never works because the brain quickly gets bored. And so the dopamine that you get from that drops off. And so there is no better sustainable way to be happy and fulfilled than to keep pushing yourself on the edge of your comfort zone. But the issue is that you have to tolerate the dopamine drop of lower brain activation. You have to increase your tolerance for failure, loss, rejection in order to iterate and get feedback and make improvements and be on the edge of your comfort zone. And most people have lost that muscle to be able to do that. That's character in a sense. So what we're talking about here is an accelerated form of character development. And so we have too much dopamine coming in as wealthy nations. We lose the muscle that can help deal with the dopamine drop. And so we have too much self-esteem pain and fear of missing out pain. And it's very easy for the lower brain, furthermore, to displace responsibility, which is to play the victim role, to say everybody sucks, the situation sucks, why even bother trying? Lower brain is just looking for excuse to not have this pain because it represents an existential threat of potentially losing access to tribe, status, pleasure, opportunities. And so paradoxically, it blocks us from getting here, where long term, this is far superior for all the above. Okay, so this is why most people don't do this, don't go to the promised land. And that's why we're going to focus on how to increase our muscle for tolerating the dopamine drop. And in fact, there's extensive literature to show, first of all, you should have compassion for yourself and everybody else because we are programmed by thousands of influences. This computer system is very sophisticated and making decisions before you are aware of it. And then we make excuses for why we did what we did. There's very good evidence for that. We do not have free will until you start to increase and behave. And there's another book that really put it over the top. One of the great neuroscientists of our time, Robert Sapolsky, that there are a lot of triggering things that happen before that lead to our decision making minutes, hours, weeks, millennia before. And so really the key to establishing free will and living that rich life, getting to the promised land, is the ability to tolerate discomfort first of being aware that your lower brain is on. Once you have that and you accept yourself as you are, negative and positive emotions, negative and positive signs of lower brain activation, then you start having access to your computer system and you start to be able to reprogram it to serve your needs long term, getting to the promised land of exhilaration, fulfillment, connection, excellence, success, all the above. And so the analogy we gave is that you need to put in reps of discomfort, and that's going to build psychological safety internally and externally. Brain tools or combinations of brain tools can help you decrease the discomfort of lifting weights, of taking on uh, discomfort, and all the payoffs of being lower brain off and lower brain on, which you are now familiar with. And so this is the idea, is that we need to put in reps. You have to structure your life so that you're putting in reps every day, many times a day. It's just awareness and just how you deal with the moment. It's not that you have to put in extra time. You can squeeze this into the nooks and crannies of your day. It's just expanding this part of your brain that makes you self-aware and self-regulating. That is now lifting weights, building the higher brain, which then leads to other aspects of higher brain coming online. And doing this as a community, as you are, is even more powerful because it becomes much easier to do when everybody has a shared language, shared understanding, shared practices, shared accountability. Okay, so what we talked about in the last session as well was what are the 4 steps of self-regulation. So in the grand scheme of this program, we're going to teach a 4-step process for self-regulation, which allows you to shut off the lower brain and go higher brain and keep pushing into discomfort of different kinds on the edge of your comfort zone, knowledge, understanding, skills, difficult conversations, which leads me to the 6 steps of co-regulation, another part of the higher brain that we'll talk about later, which allows you to build this muscle, which allows you to tolerate the discomfort of relational discomfort, difficult conversations, right? So one big part is self-regulation, the internal difficult conversation that you're having with life. And then 6-step co-regulation is another set of capacity that you expand. And then you'll more and more readily be able to push into life and live a life that's very rich, excellent, successful, connected, innovative, impactful, all the above. Wherever you are, what your job is doesn't matter. It's bringing magic to that role, to that moment. The magic is same for everybody. It doesn't matter the false narrative of how much money you make or what rank you have or what promotion you got. That actually doesn't matter from moment to moment. That's a false story of lower brain evolutionary trickery. Okay, so there's 4 steps of self-regulation. What's the trigger in this situation? What's the sign that I went lower brain? What's the narrative that my brain is telling me? And then finally, how do I shift from lower to higher? That's it. That's a very powerful 4-step process for self-regulation that virtually no one does. Even mindfulness pales by comparison to this because mindfulness is a more passive activity and it's not structured. And in fact, there's lots of evidence that mindfulness doesn't work in many instances, in fact, can be harmful because if you don't have a plan and you open up the can of worms that is the lower brain, it can actually worsen your situation. So it's really important in modern times when we become very lower brain activated to not just open that up with mindfulness with no plan. You've got to have a plan. So mindfulness can be very powerful. This is a more advanced form of mindfulness for modern times. And so these 4 steps correspond to here's step 1. And thank you to Gina Lehman, by the way, for helping me improve this. Speaking of feedback. So the next 4 slides were meant to be the 4 steps, but she had me make it more clear that this is step 1. Step 1 corresponds to step 1 here, which is what is the category of discomfort that you're dealing with right now? Just identifying, well, there's a famous saying that if you name it, you tame it, right? Just identifying what the category of difficult conversation is a higher brain function of being a detective and being self-aware, and that pulls you out of the lower brain. So you trick yourself out of the lower brain by accepting and examining the lower brain. Now, if it's a really big trigger, you may get pulled back down there over and over again, and then you pull yourself back up, and it's a tussle in this particular situation because it's a real vulnerability. For me, it's people who are mean. When I get someone's mean to me or angry at me, it's very triggering. I need to bring in 3 or 4 tools to keep me anchored up here. Step 2, what are the signs that I'm lower brain? And we went through that, right? And so just again, identifying that allows you to trick yourself out of the lower brain, but then also have a plan for step 1. This will give you an idea of, hey, in this particular category, like for me, it's, someone is angry at me. What is my plan for that situation so that I can identify it faster, intercept it, and stay anchored up here? Usually works 9 times out of 10. Every once in a while it doesn't work, and I realize, okay, I need to have even more sophisticated plan, more advanced identification. So what are the signs? Step 2, what are the signs that I'm lower brain? Step 3, what's the narrative? Is it a dopamine drop of lost self-esteem, being offended? It's a big one for me. Is it craving? Is it FOMO, fear of missing out on resources and pleasure, opportunity, right? So this is the evolutionary drive of tribe and status. This is the evolutionary drive of resources and opportunity. And they all are meant to optimize mating success to advance our genes. They really don't produce. That's why arrival fallacy is the idea that dopamine by itself from the outside, status, pleasure, opportunity, it actually ultimately doesn't work that well. And then anxiety, fear of the unknown, is really behind it is sort of the Wizard of Oz controlling the O and the C as 2 dopamine strings controlling us like puppets. Anxiety is ultimately fearing the discomfort of loss. This is all lower brain is a loss narrative. What's the narrative that's being told? And these are just priming factors. We don't have to deal with that right now. So step 4 then is, okay, so I've got, and we're going to be over time, we're going to learn all these brain tools, but you know a lot of them already based on this program and based on your own experience. This just tells you what different parts of the brain are activated. Left prefrontal cortex is about, self-awareness and changing the narrative, gamification of life, directly anchoring in the higher brain from front to back throughout or throughout the brain, and the social part of the brain. These different parts of the higher brain can allow you to activate it so you stay anchored up there. So how did you either stay there or you went lower and then you pulled yourself back up and stayed there ideally? Or it's a tussle that's going on back and forth because it's a real trigger. It's a real Achilles heel for you, and we all have them, right? So step 4 is how do we pull ourselves back out? Okay. That's it. That's very powerful system for self-regulation that allows you to be more and more courageous. It allows you to be more fearless. It allows you to be more on the edge of your comfort zone with all those payoffs that we were talking about. It allows you to have difficult conversations because you're like, you know what? Worst case scenario, I'll be able to stay regulated and so it'll be fine, right? That's a kind of concept of self-efficacy. That's what I would call a higher brain self-esteem, which is we'll be able to deal with it. Okay. So let's just go in. Let's figure out what's wrong here. Let's tackle it. So let's innovate. Let's ask for help. Let's have the difficult conversation. It'll be fine. And so that kind of feeling of it'll be fine is a very powerful aspect of expanding that part of your higher brain and expanding self-regulatory capacity leads to greater self-efficacy, and then the other payoffs of greater willingness, fearlessness in learning, and growing, learning, innovating, connecting, just becoming happy, and even spiritual advancement is certain centers in the brain. Okay, so every time you do this, and this we're going to wrap it up now, every time you do this, you're expanding a branch on your neural network. Moment to moment to moment to moment, you get to a critical mass, and then boom, you've got an expansion of these parts of your left prefrontal cortex. The orbital prefrontal cortex is the storytelling. And we're going to talk next about different ways to change the narrative to flip yourself out of the lower brain. Medial prefrontal cortex is the sensory awareness of being lower brain. Dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is the intellectual awareness of being lower brain. The more you do this, the bigger that muscle gets, the more you pull yourself out of the lower brain more rapidly or stop yourself from going there in the first place or have create a plan for the future. And so it's important because in modern times, life is so noisy and busy that we need to create a habit. So I would even have a counter or here's one you can just put on your finger and just keep clicking it every time you do the 4 steps. It's like it takes 2 seconds to do each step. Click, click, click all throughout the day. You're like, oh man, I got to 100. It kind of gamifies the process of becoming self-regulated and building the capacity for self-regulation just by life. Life comes at us all the time. That's discomfort. That builds this muscle of self-regulation. But then we can also push the agenda of being on the edge of our comfort zone. And that's going to be triggering. That helps us resolve parts of our lower brain and keep building this muscle. So this is a kind of way to gamify it. Now, why is this stuff important as educators and just for people in general? I know SEL is big in the educational world, social emotional learning. But I think this technology that we have with the Leo program is vital because it turns out that emotional and relational strain are just too threatening for the lower brain. So the lower brain will entice you with dopamine to avoid the discomfort of taking on emotional and relational self-awareness. And so it's really important to have a more sophisticated approach that allows you and soothes your lower brain to allow you to push into greater and greater awareness of emotional strain or relational strain in order to build self-regulatory and co-regulatory capacity. And so if you don't have this kind of more sophisticated understanding, self-awareness, and approach, you're going to be subconsciously diverted away from social and emotional learning as a human being. And so you have to have self-compassion because all negativity, all negative feelings and negative interactions are an existential threat to the lower brain. And it's like, no way, we're not interested. Oh, here's some dopamine. Let's just go over here. We don't need to do that. It's probably a waste of time and they don't care anyways, and it won't work. And it's probably not a big deal. Like all the rationale, the lower brain is very sophisticated at enticing you away from this kind of self-awareness. And so we want to, reframe negative emotions as in fact building the muscle and reestablishing free will and now controlling and programming the computer system to serve your long-term needs of happiness, exhilaration, fulfillment, connection, success. And so we need tools to build confidence and skill before you just open up the Pandora's box of being sort of self-aware. Similar to mindfulness, SEL's risk is that if you just try to open it up, it can be very triggering. And if you don't have a plan for that, it's a problem. You're making things worse. Similarly with social dynamics and opening up that Pandora's box. And so, and frankly, relational negativity is even more threatening. It's the most threatening, right? Because tribe and status is by far more important. And so social dynamics in the SEL is even more threatening. You're even less likely to be able to get there and do some work unless you have a good plan, a good system, a good ability to self-regulate and co-regulate, which then allows you to become more and more fearless and then build more and more muscle. And it's a virtuous cycle that starts to happen. Okay, so let's stop it there. That's a little bit of a review of what we did in the first half-day workshop. And so hopefully that'll kind of get you back up to speed, crystallize some things, and then we'll start with a conversation about these ideas when we get together. Fantastic. Thank you so much.